This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman, from the Epoch Times. And now let's begin today's discussion by talking about President Trump, who recently had a victory in court. That's right, 3 days ago, after several years of legal back and forth, President Trump won the case against porn star Stormy Daniels, who has now been ordered to pay him $300,000 in legal fees. And so, coming right off of that victory, just yesterday, President Trump filed a new lawsuit. Specifically, he filed a federal lawsuit against Hillary Clinton, against Christopher Steele, who is the former British spy behind that infamous Steele dossier, as well as against about 30 other people. And his lawsuit, it alleges that these individuals, they carried out a national plot to weave a false narrative that Trump somehow colluded with Russia. Now, of course, that all took place about 5 or 6 years ago. However, with the most recent developments in John Durham's investigation, we now have a much clearer picture of what was really taking place behind the scenes. Here's in fact part of what his lawsuit, which by the way, this lawsuit is about 108 pages long, but here's what it says in relevant part, quote, "The actions taken in furtherance of their scheme, falsifying evidence, deceiving law enforcement, and exploiting access to highly sensitive data sources are so outrageous, subversive, and incendiary that even the events of Watergate pale in comparison." Now, just to pause here for a quick moment, we here at the Epoch Times, we have been following this Spygate saga since about 2016. And frankly, the details, including all of the different actors involved, are incredibly complex. We, in fact, had to publish several large infographics in order to make sense of what was even happening. You can, by the way, find all those infographics pinned in the description box below this video. However, it was only recently that more details came out regarding exactly how this whole affair was playing out behind the scenes. And so, just a few weeks ago, you had Mr. John Durham, who is of course the special counsel leading the investigation into the spying. He submitted a court filing which showed that the Democrats were allegedly paying money to infiltrate the servers of President Trump's private residence, his office, as well as the servers of the White House. And this third point, it was occurring during the time when President Trump was already in office. And so, piggybacking on these developments from John Durham's investigation, here's what President Trump's lawsuit had to say, quote, "Under the guise of opposition research, data analytics, and other political stratagems, the defendants nefariously sought to sway the public's trust. They worked together with a single, self-serving purpose, to vilify Donald J. Trump. Indeed, their far-reaching conspiracy was designed to cripple Trump's bid for presidency by fabricating a scandal that would be used to trigger an unfounded federal investigation and ignite a media frenzy." And a media frenzy it was. You might already not remember it, just because so much has happened since then with so many crises coming out one after the other. But back during President Trump's first 2 years in office, this whole Trump-Russia narrative, it was the biggest story across almost every mainstream news outlet. Now, of course, special counsel Bob Mueller, he concluded that there was no actual evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, but the fact that there was no evidence did not stop many of the legacy media outlets in this country from propagating these false claims day and night for quite literally 2 years. In fact, there was an analysis that was conducted by the Media Research Center, and it found that during Trump's first year in office, the Trump-Russia collusion story, it was the #1 most covered topic. The #1 most covered topic. Major networks spent more time covering Russian collusion than on any other policy topic that was happening in the country. Here's specifically what that Media Research Center analysis concluded, quote, "From Inauguration Day, which was January 20th, 2017, through the end of 2017, meaning until December 31st, the 3 evening newscasts aired 3,430 stories that talked about either President Trump or his administration, totaling 99 hours, 3 minutes of airtime, about 34% of all evening news. The tone of coverage has been incessantly hostile, 90% negative versus just 10% positive, with the Russian investigation alone accounting for 1/5 of all Trump coverage, accounting for 1,234 minutes of airtime. And furthermore, despite the massive coverage of Russian collusion, these networks, well, they devoted almost no airtime to questioning how this investigation actually began, meaning where did these allegations actually originate from. That was almost never discussed. And so what this means is that even though President Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election, he was dogged by these collusion allegations for many years afterwards as president. And thus, the agenda that he was actually elected to enact by the American people was heavily stalled. However, although the media covered this topic extensively, the fact is that technically they really should have known better. And the reason that I can say that rather definitively is because back in May of 2017, at the same time that they were publishing their stories nonstop, we here at the Epoch Times, we looked into the actual evidence that was available, and we found that despite the allegations, there was no evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. And that is exactly what we reported. And ironically, because we reported the truth of the matter, instead of just following along with the narrative, Well, we were branded by those other legacy media outlets as being right-wing conspiracy theorists, which at that time at least, it really made me understand quite lucidly why most people cover stories the exact same way. Because if you step outside of the preconceived narrative, well, you are prone to being attacked. Regardless, though, that did not stop us here at the Epoch Times. We kept investigating, and to our surprise, and it really was not something that we were expecting, what we found was a vast network of people who seemed to be working to take down President Trump behind the scenes. That's when we published the insurance policy infographic detailing how a piece of opposition party research, the so-called Steele dossier, which was once described by former FBI Director James Comey as being both salacious and unverified, became the driving force behind the Trump colluding with Russia allegations. And from that point on, we just continued to dig, we continued to do our research, and we continued to uncover the details regarding all the spying that was done on the Trump campaign, such as the methods that Obama-era officials used to spy on the Trump campaign, how a high-level FBI official had vowed to stop a Trump presidency, how Mueller's report found no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, nor any obstruction, how a former CIA contractor working for the firm that created the Steele dossier frequently sent Russian research to DOJ officials, how the FBI, under Andrew McCabe, tried to actually re-engage with Christopher Steele after Comey was fired, as well as how the Justice Department determined that James Comey leaked classified information and violated FBI policies in the process, in so doing. Now, my point here is not to say how great we are or something like that. Rather, what I believe this means is that these other legacy media outlets, which have many times more resources to investigate the stories than we do, they somehow missed the mark. Perhaps they wanted the story to be true so much that they were blinded to the obvious facts, but who knows? We, of course, cannot actually know what's going on inside their heads. However, once it was revealed that these allegations were not true, the big question became where did they actually originate from and who can be held responsible for them? Well, in the 6 years since the election, we have been able to map out a relatively clear picture of what took place behind the scenes. A lot of it came from the John Durham investigation. Essentially, Mr. Christopher Steele, who is the former British spy, he compiled a dossier based on what he claimed were sources inside of Russia. However, eventually it was revealed that his main source was a man named Igor Danchenko, who's been investigated by federal agents as possibly being a Russian spy. And then furthermore, Christopher Steele himself was paid to produce the dossier by the DNC as well as by Clinton's campaign. And after taking the money and producing the salacious dossier, he released it to reporters ahead of the 2016 election and started that media firestorm that we discussed earlier, which is exactly what President Trump is now suing against. Here's specifically what his lawsuit says, quote, "In the run-up to the 2016 presidential election, Hillary Clinton and her cohorts orchestrated an unthinkable plot, one that shocks the conscience and is an affront to the nation's democracy. Acting in concert, the defendants maliciously conspired to weave a false narrative that their Republican opponent, Donald J. Trump, was colluding with a hostile foreign sovereignty." Now, as I mentioned earlier, besides Hillary Clinton and Christopher Steele, defendants in the lawsuit include the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, John Sullivan, who is currently the National Security Advisor, but back then he was Hillary Clinton's campaign advisor, a company called Fusion GPS, who helped to produce and distribute the dossier, Mr. Igor Danchenko, who is the Russian national charged with lying to the FBI as part of John Durham's investigation, as well as several former FBI officials like James Comey and as well as Andrew McCabe. However, the tone of the defendants in their public comments against this lawsuit are, as you kind of expected them to be, rather dismissive. For instance, Mr. John Podesta, who is both the chairman of the Clinton 2016 campaign as well as one of the defendants in this lawsuit, here's what he wrote on Twitter. "Do you think Trump filed this case with the hope of calling Vladimir Putin as a character witness? Trump deposition ought to be a hoot." Likewise, the lawyer representing FBI official Peter Strzok, well, he released this as a part of his statement. "We haven't had a chance to read the complaint, but knowing the former president, there's probably very little in there that's true. However, unlike previously when the truth was decided by the media, well, in this case, it'll be a court of law that'll have to decide whether the facts contained in this particular lawsuit are true or not." Now, in terms of damages, President Trump's lawsuit is seeking more than $24 million in costs and damages, as well as a jury trial. And so perhaps as this federal lawsuit is going to be working itself through the court system, especially with the process of discovery, more of the facts will actually come to light. And who knows, perhaps several years from now, we'll have a headline like this, but in regards to this case. Now, if you'd like to read the details of this case for yourself, which I would actually recommend that you do if you have the time, it's a little bit long, but you could consider reading it because it lays out the details pretty well, point by point, and it details exactly what the spying allegations are rather rationally. I'll throw a link to the PDF version of this lawsuit. It'll be found in the description box below. And all I ask in return is that you take a super quick moment to smash both that like button as well as that subscribe button. That way, not only can this video be shared out ever more widely, but also you can get honest news delivered directly into your newsfeed every single weekday. as long as YouTube doesn't kick us off.